up.
Okay. We have had technical issues, and we do apologize for that, but I currently blame Trump just because of the fact he's always good for it. Or the mainstream media.
Yeah, it's on the same live stream.
I couldn't blame Jeff Bezos, but I haven't figured out why yet. Anyways, we all need somebody to blame, especially when things don't go our way. But actually, things are kind of going our way now a little bit. We have a clip here from a friend of the show, Andy D'Angelo. You have that queued up, Carlos?
Gigantic news in the press today. I'm sure you've already heard, everybody. The DEA has agreed to reclassify cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. Did we ever think this was going to happen? I did not think they were going to approve the recommendation. It appears from the press reports that they are. There's still some stuff that needs to happen before it gets finalized, but wow, big day. I'm on year 40 of my work advocating for the cannabis plant. To see this happen on my 40th year, I'm glad I'm around to see it. Of course, it's going to be complicated. Schedule 3 is no picnic. It might be a case of be careful what you wish for. You're going to have to register your businesses with the DEA, and that will be another layer of compliance. We'll get 280E relief. Awesome. And, you know, like everything, it's going to be Schedule 3. One thing that is not complicated. And that's the next thing we have to work on, everybody. It's still 6 months before the election, a little bit more than that, and I think if we keep the pressure on, we can do that. So let's not forget about our prisoners as we celebrate this historic day. It's a great day to be part of this movement. I'm so proud of every single one of us and all the sacrifices that all the people have made over the generations. A historic day.
Oh, I should take Gary off. There's so much on. Go for it.
But it just goes. I have a senator that I talked to. Actually, he just termed out this last year, Senator Baxley, who always tells me words matter, and it's almost a butterfly effect. Just the fact you change from one word to another can really affect possibly the lives of millions. And in fact, this whole concept of changing from cannabis to marijuana allow it to become illegal and allow us to go ahead and incarcerate as many people who are incarcerated today. In some cases, life sentences for a nonviolent offense. And that's the power of words, essentially. Wouldn't you agree, David?
I do, and there's actually evidence that shows that the words we use relative to cannabis, the words we use over time has actually changed people's perceptions about it. So it's important to use the right words, you know, and that's what language is all about. You know, if we use the right words and if we're aware of those trigger words, where people just shut down and don't listen to us or put us in a box, which we've, you know, really, that's been our situation for decades. It's important, you know. So now, if we are looking to build those bridges, it's time for us to start using words that build bridges and that, you know, facilitate open communication and understanding. And once people on the other side, you know, realize that this is just a plant with medicinal and therapeutic values and benefits, then we could start getting to where we really need to be, you know. But as long as we still have, you know, generations of people calling it marijuana, you know, with all the connotations and baggage that comes along with it, we're still going to be viewed as stoners and viewed as, you know, misfits. And I think it behooves us to change that. You know, we need as a community to start to understand how we're perceived and how we can change that perception. And that comes back to what Carlos said earlier. In some ways it is a branding exercise. And just to add, if you look at all of the successful activist groups or rather movements, those movements have logos. Those movements have taglines. Those movements have all the things that brands have. If you think about ACT UP with the pink triangle, if you think about Black Lives Matter, if you think about the Me Too movement, they all have logos or imagery or graphics. They all have taglines. They all have much of what brands have. And brands and branding is really a shortcut to position things in people's minds in certain ways. And so we need, especially in the world we live today, where people have short attention spans and really need to compartmentalize things very quickly. We need to take that into heart and use those tools to better position cannabis.
Sorry, Gary.
There you go. And God bless ACT UP, because when I worked for the Centers for Disease Control back in the 90s, they made my life hell. But the fact is, they were an amazing group, and they were an amazing source of communication that changed a whole attitude behind just the concept of being HIV positive and having AIDS and things of that sort, from where it was before to a point where we could actually work on it and work on research and things of that sort to get things better as far as that's concerned. And that's basically what is hopefully going to happen. I'm saying hopefully, with this change from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, is that we'll be able to start doing the proper research without any hindrance. Because of that, we don't have the words in our way and the regulation in our way that opens it up and stops making it, public enemy number one of beyond everything.
But why do we need to do all this research? Like why can't we just go to like declassifying? Why do we have to go to Schedule 3?
Well, for one thing, some research is done in the paradigm of the time in which the research was done. I mean, I'll grant you that I have some papers from 1880s that talk about cannabis being a way to remediate opioid poisoning. Now, no one calls it opioid poisoning anymore. And again, there are different ideas and thoughts in regards to opioids at that point in time. But the science is there, but the paradigm isn't quite there. So it's kind of hard to shift everything to the modern era in regards to that. I mean, if you look at the research that was done in was it Bangladesh or was it wherever in regards to Shaughnessy? I mean, a lot of the things that he did don't necessarily translate to today, but they were all based in science. So sometimes you just need a fresh research with the new tools we have right now, both in language and also in technology is concerned, to be able to properly clean up data and utilize all the things that we have to see what small things make a big difference in regards to those results. But that's a matter of research.
And I think you hit the nail on the head, Gary. I think research is really about the perspective. Well, it's the context in which it's done, right? So if you think about, sure, there's been lots of research on cannabis, but actually a lot of it has been looking for the negative effects and benefits of or effects rather of the plant, and so it really, I would question how much objective scientific research has been done relative to the plant. Carlos, to go back to your question, I don't think there's ever been any substance that has been a Schedule 1 drug that has been decontrolled. There's a process that takes place, and God, there's no more red tape than the government, right? And all the processes that it's created. So, in my opinion, to think that it would go from a Schedule 1 drug to a decontrolled substance, I think those folks that actually think that in reality could happen, I think they're fooling themselves, quite frankly. So it doesn't surprise me that, it will be, hopefully will be rescheduled. And, Andrew D'Angelo in his message a few moments ago, called out like it's going to take some time and there's still a few bumps in the road. And so, I mean, I hate to say this, but I'll believe it when I see it. I think it is going to take quite some time. It's not something that's happening tomorrow, um, and it's all a process. And there are folks that are for it as much as there are folks against it. So in my opinion, the jury's still out. I'll see it when I believe it.
Has there ever been a substance that has been rescheduled? Has something ever moved from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2 or 3 before? Is this like completely uncharted territory for the United States?
That's a good question. I have a hunch, but I don't know a factual answer to that.
Well, what's your hunch?
My hunch is that there have been
Uh-huh.
there have been substances that have been rescheduled, and that there's a process around it. I don't think we're in totally new territory, but where I do think we are in new territory is that this has been a substance that has been demonized and has really been mischaracterized, and now there's a movement to change that, and hopefully that will happen. The thing that I think is most important is not only research, and I was speaking to Montel Williams last week, and I spoke about research, and he said there's been no substance that has been researched more than cannabis. And again, I think Gary made the best point, which is it really comes back to the contextualization of that research. But even if we look today across multiple states, a serving size of THC is not the same in every state. And could you ever imagine seeing Tylenol or Advil being different strengths or dosages across different states? I mean, that just makes no sense at all, not only from a safety perspective, but from a branding perspective, right? If you go to McDonald's, you want McDonald's. If you drink a Coke, you want a Coke. It's all about consistency. It's all about managing expectations. That's what branding is. Branding is a promise and the ability to consistently deliver on that promise. So if we have cannabis brands or cannabis products in different states, New Mexico, where it could be up to 50 milligrams of THC per serving. Washington State is 10, Massachusetts is 5, right? So, if you're talking about a 10x difference in, or even a 2x difference in dosing, that could both be dangerous and confusing. So I feel we need to get to a place where we're talking about an equal playing field across the federal landscape, so people understand what it is they're consuming and what it is they're purchasing and how it will affect them.
It just what you guys are saying makes sense. Like, don't get me wrong, but on the other side of things too, it's like there's no recorded deaths. More than half the U.S. has legalized. It's a safe substance. Like, the ultimate goal here should be that you could grow it in your backyard and buy it at the store. And I am so scared of giving too much and getting too little back. You know what I mean? I'm afraid that Andrew D'Angelo is understating what could happen here. This could just make cannabis legal for big pharma, and my biggest thing with the whole cannabis industry is I want to own an actual dispensary. That's what Chillum is based on, and it's my goal is to treat people with this plant. and it scares me that I'm never going to be able to do that. Um, so what do you guys think? Is this a step for that direction? Is am I going to be able to have my dream of owning a cannabis dispensary one day, or do you think, like, uh, I should just give up my dream just to make the plant a little bit freer so that they can sell it at Walgreens?
Well, here's my take on that.
Okay.
I think the jury is still out, and and absolutely, be careful what you wish for. Right there's no doubt about that. Um, what I do see potentially happening is, with the tax code, the 280E tax code, um, being pushed aside or set aside because it's not a Schedule One drug, that could potentially, well, one, that will certainly help, all cannabis companies with their expenses, which will meaning that they could write off expenses. Once they can write off expenses, they will most likely be more profitable, or I should say profitable. um, and if they're profitable, then there's the opportunity for investors to really come back into the game. That those that were interested initially, and those that would like to, invest in cannabis. So I do think there's lots of opportunity that this will bring. But the other side of that is, does big pharma come in right now, or find the opportunity to do that? In many ways, I think big pharma and alcohol and tobacco have been on the sidelines and have been, waiting for an opportunity, and quite frankly, have been playing in the game. The alcohol industry, and many of the big players in the alcohol industry not only have invested in cannabis, like Constellation Brands, but have also lobbied against it. So they are playing both sides of the fence, and they're looking to win on either side. Whether lobbying against cannabis so people continue to drink more, or investing in it so there's an opportunity for them not to miss the boat. So it's happening on both sides, and it's happening all around us, and time will really tell how it all plays out.
I hate to be a cynic, David, but basically what I just heard was give up on your dreams.
No, no.
Well, I just said, I mean, we're at a point now where corporate cannabis holds the reign on the industry. So, any tax breaks that are going to go, this is going to benefit True Leaf and Cure Leaf on the tax breaks, who lobby to keep people like me out of the business. And, I also heard that, tobacco, pharmaceutical companies, and alcohol have the ability to join the industry if it comes into Schedule 3. So it'll just completely take out the little guy.
It might. I'm
Yeah.
not. I'm not saying it won't, but I still believe we have to fight the good fight. We have to do what we're doing. But and I know this might not come across, in perhaps the most positive light, and maybe my New Yorker, skeptical, critical, cynical, um, inner being is about to come out. But in many ways, we as a community have fought for the legalization of cannabis for so many years, um, and in my opinion, I don't necessarily know if we've done so in the best way. Showing up in front of the White House every 420, smoking 4 foot long joints, is not the best way, in my opinion, to normalize. Now, is it a way for us as a community to express ourselves? It is. But is that really what the game is? Is it about us expressing ourselves, or is it about us normalizing the plant? And so I think that's like a critical aspect to what we're doing. We want to express ourselves, we want the freedoms we want, but in pushing things in people's faces that they don't like, um, doesn't necessarily do us any good. So, for me, I believe, we've had our opportunity. We as a community and activists, cannabis activists, have had decades to fight. And while we've made a lot of progress, we haven't made as much progress as we really want or we need. And so, who knows? Maybe it is time for things to shift. For and trust me when I say this, I'm not a fan of big pharma at all. But what I do know is big pharma knows the rules. They know how to play the game. They know how to get drugs and substances created and approved. Maybe that's what we need. Now, that's also not to say that craft cannabis goes away when that happens, right? That there is potentially opportunity for both systems to work. And for it, I think the tomato model explains that best. Where you can grow tomatoes in your backyard. You can go to the gourmet food shop and get heirloom tomatoes, or you could go to Walmart and pick up your standard tomatoes. And they're available everywhere, and everybody is allowed to grow tomatoes. It just depends how it all sort of falls out. But in some ways, I'm intrigued and I'm interested to see what actually happens, because there are powers out there that in this case, big pharma, that might be able to move things or change things. And the truth is, let's say 5-10 years from now, cannabis is something that a doctor prescribes and a physician distributes and insurance pays for. And let's say they come in tablet form. That's not necessarily a bad thing for us, right? It's now a true medication. It's has been accepted, et cetera, but we still may have the ability to grow it in our own backyard, to go to a dispensary to pick up some craft flower, et cetera. So it really just needs to play out. I don't necessarily think it's an all or nothing game. Time will tell.
Well, I'm gonna say one thing and then I'll unmute Gary. I'm not gonna quit fighting. So we definitely will see how the whole thing plays out. To not be so cynical about what you're saying. I think about what it would take to open up a dispensary in the state of Florida now versus what it takes to open up a craft beer place. You know what I mean? A craft beer brewery. I mean, there's significant barriers to entry into the brewery business, but it's much more attainable than where we're at now. So maybe this is going to be some progress. And you're good to go, Gary.
Okay. Again, in this war of words, we've got a lot of moving parts, a lot of players that are sometimes making things better, and others are making it quite worse. I think the media, in general, has often made it worse, in part because almost every article we've seen from the very first time that we had even CBD legal in the state of Florida, every single article was laced with puns, so to speak, about smoking and pot, and we're bringing this to a higher move, and this is all smoke and mirrors and yada yada yada. And in making those kind of jokes, they did not further the intelligence of the people who are listening to them. This is an article that just came out yesterday from Fox 13. You gotta love Fox, right? They're always so fair and balanced. But it says more than 10 students at New Springs Charter School in Tampa got sick after eating candy believed to be laced with Delta-9 THC, according to officers. Officers, first off, don't have the testing facilities on site to be able to tell what the hell is in there. And someone gave them the idea that if they say Delta-9 THC, that raises alarms. Before that, they used to just say laced with weed. But now we gave them a term that they can go ahead and throw around, especially the Delta-9 THC, which is derived from hemp, which is currently legal because of the Farm Act. And so this is basically made to demonize those small mom and pop shops, like you said, Carlos, that are currently selling these Delta-9 infused products. Now, I notice I use the word infused and not laced, because laced also has a bad connotation involved with it. It says the Tampa Police Department said they responded to the school located on East Bush Boulevard. School staff told police that several children got sick after eating the candy. What do they mean by sick? It means that they mellowed out for a while. Maybe some of them got a little bit nauseous, but they're not rolling around with foaming at the mouth and bleeding out of their ears like there's Ebola around. It says school employees told TPD that they found a clear cylindrical container that had two pieces of what looks like Nerds branded candies, sometimes legally sold as Delta 9 THC products in Florida. First off, there is no legal path to sell a California product, which is those nerd ropes, in Florida. And again, those nerd branded candies, most of them are coming out of California. They actually have real THC in them. They're not the ones that are hemp derived. But this is what we're dealing with. The way they framed the whole article. And again, they're blaming California products that are coming over here, which means we do have people out there that are selling those California branded products as if they were Florida products, which they aren't. And so we have all sorts of folks being demonized for things they weren't even possibly responsible for. There are some bad players out there. There are some trappers that are they're selling various things that push out these products across the country. But there is no interstate commerce per se. Except for the illegal kind. So we deal with this, and that's an issue. Do you have that problem in Washington State at all?
Well, I'm sure it exists to a certain degree, but for the most part, there's 460 licensed dispensaries in Washington State. I don't see those types of problems here, but there are definitely non-licensed bodegas that sell things they probably shouldn't be selling, or more of the kratom focused shops. But I just came back from New York City and was blown away by all the stores there that are not licensed and selling products that are from California. Some of the things I asked immediately when I saw some of the different brands, like Akiva or Sherbinsky's, and I said, are these being grown here in New York State? And the woman said, no, not at all. We get them from California. And then I asked, are you a licensed dispensary? And she said, no, we're not. And I said, at this point, how come you're not asking if I'm a cop? And she said, because you don't look like a cop. And I said, okay. I said, then do you mind if I ask more questions? And what she went on to say was, there are so many unlicensed shops in New York City that, and nothing's being done about it, that they're willing to take the risk. But what this also does is all of those shops, those dispensaries that are licensed, or all of those people that have really fought to get licenses, that have paid, large sums of money to get those licenses, that have rented out stores, and they're waiting for their license to come through while they're paying $10,000 or $20,000 a month in Manhattan for a store. The law-abiding citizens that are, all about the cannabis industry, legal cannabis, they're spending all their money. They're waiting while all these other folks that are just jumping in, opening up unlicensed shops, making a killing, who don't care if they need to close down their shop or if they get shut down. So it's really unfair, what's happening to the people that are really doing it by the book and for the love of cannabis. And then there are all these other folks that they're in it for making a buck. So it's really not fair. But Gary, to your point too, words like laced rather than infused, etc. I mean, those are the types of terms that we really need to be mindful of. I just put a link up or a post on LinkedIn, which actually got a lot of different feedback, both positive and negative. But I was really upset with, one, the mass media's attention or talk about the rescheduling, and in particular I wrote about Stephen Colbert, who I personally appreciate, and watch him often. But the way he spoke about the rescheduling, the way he joked about it, the way he contextualized it and said, this is Joe Biden's way of getting more younger voters, as well as making stoner jokes. It was like, wow, really? I mean, there are people like us that fight every day, long and hard, for the normalization of the plant. And finally, there's a milestone at the federal government level, and still people are taking pot shots, no pun intended, at us, and it's just like, really? Like, this is people's therapy. This is people's medication. This is people's way of life. How is it funny? And a lot of people came back at me on LinkedIn and said, well, Colbert's a comedian, what do you expect? And I guess that's true, but again, we as insiders, industry insiders, need to be mindful of the words we use, because there is still people that are making fun of us and are boxing us in, and it's time we figure out their game and start using their game against them. It's like judo, quite frankly.
I have to admit, you guys, the series Disjointed on Netflix comes to mind, and another reality show, Jimmy Kimmel actually produced the show, but the story, it just came out on Hulu. I think it's called High Hopes. It's about this stoner from Michigan that moves out to California to work at a dispensary, and it's more about the actual workings of the dispensary, but they focus in on this guy because he's like the quintessential stoner type. And the whole time is, whether it's, we finally get these shows on reality shows and sitcoms on Netflix and stuff like that, and the whole time it's all cracks on stoners. And it drives me absolutely fucking bonkers, man. I can't stand it when I go to a family event and then somebody who's prescribed Xanax makes, oh, fucking smoke another one, bro. Like, it hurts my heart, especially when it's family members, and it's like, how do you, like, you don't know what I do all day long trying to change these stigmas? Like, I run 3 companies. What the fuck do you do? Smoke another one. Pop some Xanax, god damn it. It's definitely still there. Those stigmas are still there, and I feel like we hear about all the time how we're making moves in this business. Cannabis is going to be legalized. Cannabis is going to be legalized. And then at the same time, where pot makes you lazy. I don't smoke pot because it gives me such crippling anxiety.
You have your phone in your pocket? Maybe too close to the microphone. Anyways, yeah, that brings me to my favorite commercial, which is a guy in a hard hat working in a construction zone, and the commercial is for something to take care of his constipation from using opioids because of his bad back. Now, if you're in a construction zone where you have to wear a hard hat and you're on Xanax, your constipation is not your biggest problem. I think anybody in a construction zone should not be on Xanax, period. But they frame that differently, as in Xanax is the passive partner here, and that the real problem is the constipation, not the fact that he might not be able to do his job on Xanax. Whereas folks on cannabis often can do their job. Some people actually do their job better, but we are taking this stance that if a person uses cannabis off the shift and not on call, and it does not affect the work performance, it shouldn't have anything to do with your job. But then again, those people who use opioids, that's a different situation, and you can't lump the two into the same boat. But that is what the Controlled Substance Act did in the first place: is lumped cannabis with the worst of the worst. And we see that just go on and on and on. And hopefully, with the reschedulization, unfortunately, that will change. Do you see it changing? Do you see branding changing, David? I think Carlos muted you. I just noticed that. Well, can you hear me? Okay, well then I'll talk. But we do need to discuss what is going to be the aftermath if and when the rescheduling does happen. Now, it's my understanding that this may change the tax law in regards to the was it 408E that allows people who are in a business like this to be able to deduct their business expenses, which was basically based on taxing people who are actually drug dealers back in the 1980s. But the fact is, it's hurting the industry right now because they have to pay far more taxes than other industries because of that we have that particular thing. Now, bringing it down would apparently take it out of that issue federally. That may not change anything as far as state taxes are concerned. And I'm not certain where 408E fits into state taxes. But we still need more access to banks. The SAFE Act and other things have come through and tried to make things work. 280E, thank you. I always get that wrong. There must be not enough medication. But we need to go ahead and change those things, and just rescheduling rather, is not going to be enough to do it. We're going to need more legislation, and we're going to have to implement it properly. That's in part the process they're going to be having to go through. Now the DEA has finally released it into the hands of its next step, and getting things going. Now we have a clip that Carlos is going to be playing in just a few moments from Paul Armentano, who's one of our chief investigators over at Normal, in regards to the way that this will play out and how this is going to happen in an interview with CNN. I'm hoping Carlos will come back on soon to be able to play it, because he has the trigger for that one. Unless I can play it from over here. I'm not certain. But we are going to be, we've been talking a lot about the descheduling. I think there's one topic we also have to go into that is similar to this, and that is the whole idea behind Amendment 3, which is going to be Florida's attempt at the legalization via ballot initiative. California can do it. Washington State can do it. Colorado did it. Illinois did it via legislative. And we're trying it this way because we did try it legislatively, and it failed each and every time because it never even got to committee. It was a stifling at the very get-go, at the very point of impact, so to speak. So we're going to go into that, and we would like your opinions on Amendment 3. And from what you know of it, do you think it is something you will vote yes on or no on? Because we have to have 60% in order for it to pass here in the state of Florida. And that's actually a tough road to climb, because there are folks who are going to go to the polls just to vote no on it. And there will probably be other folks, hopefully, that come to the polls just to vote yes on it. Hopefully they don't spend their morning with an indica and don't show up at the polls at all, which has often happened before, I might say. You cannot listen to polls that you hear on TV and decide whether or not you're going to vote based on the poll. You have to vote it basically on your own opinion on how this is going to work. And yes, it does not have home grow on it, but that is a Florida law. You cannot have any more than a single subject on any ballot initiative. So if it does two or three things, it would have not even gone through the Supreme Court. But it went through the Supreme Court. It basically is focused on making it so we can have adult use. Unfortunately, the only people who are going to be able to sell adult use are licensed dispensaries, the MMTCs, who are all vertical right now, which again takes everybody else like Carlos and everybody out of the market. They're not going to be able to get involved in this. However, the MMTCs are going to grow exponentially. If you look at all the data from across the country on pioneer research and things of that sort, adding adult use to a market does increase sales dramatically. Now, grant you, that number is also based on the fact that there's going to be a lot of taxes also attached to it. So just looking at the dollar sign alone is not going to be enough, because you may be paying as much as 32%. What is the current rate in Washington State right now for adult use on taxes? If you add the excise tax and the ad valorem tax and the sales tax altogether. You're gonna have to type it into me because I still can't hear you. They have your thing on mute. So this is technology, folks. Yeah, 35%. Now, think about it, guys. That means that the that $20 eighth you're buying right now will have an additional $7 attached to it. So, boom, you're going to be spending a lot more on the things, even on sale. But that will hopefully will increase competition and bring down the price of the base product. We'll see, because then we will also not have to worry about reciprocity. Because with adult use, anybody can come into the state and buy anywhere, whereas with medical, of course, you have to have a state medical card. And I think we got Carlos back. Carlos, can you unmute
This has
Dave?
been the most difficult episode to produce, guys. I'm sorry. I'm literally on my cell phone.
You're on your cell phone. That's okay, but are you also on at least one or two dabs?
No.
Well, then I'm glad. But Dave is still muted.
Let me take David off of mute. You can talk again, Dave.
Hey there, I'm back.
Sorry about that, guys.
Okay,
I'm going to let you get back to talking.
Yeah, we were discussing the fact that next week's show, we did want to have a lot of politicians coming in, because the qualifying position for federal office is already passed, so we know who's running for Congress, and we also know a lot of people who are going to be running in state offices, and we've got to change the face of our government in regards to getting the laws changed properly. Oh my God, there's two of you, well, at least for a little while. And so we're going to be starting to bring on all of those people who are pro-cannabis, who are on the ballot, so you can get a chance to hear what they have to say and see if you agree with them or not. One of the first ones we have coming on after the next week's Blue Convention in Florida is Bree Watson, who is going to be running for the Seminole Heights or West Tampa House District, and see if we can't flip that back Democrat, because last year we had a Republican in there who didn't do us any great favors. Thank you. Sorry, Tracy. We tried. But Bree is running for a position. She's a Gen Zer. And apparently the Gen Zs are starting to actually get politically active right now. We got Max Frost out of Florida, and he's been doing an absolutely fantastic job in D.C. And we also helped to get, although he's not a Gen Zer, Tom Keene, who is flipped a Republican district near Orlando.
Gen Z at heart, right?
To Dave, where could absolutely
My book, both books actually, Branding Bud: The Commercialization of Cannabis, which is my first book, and then Cannabis versus Marijuana are both available on Amazon.
needs to contact you directly? Is there any way they can get a hold of you?
Yeah, my website is brandingbud.com, and you can get a hold of me through there or on LinkedIn, or you can email me directly at david@brandingbud.com.
All right, fantastic. Now, because of the fact that we got Chris is not here today, we do have a clip from Paul Armentano from Normal, and we'd like to go ahead and play that in lieu of the news today, because he talks a lot about the DEA situation. Maybe if you want to hang around and take a listen to this, you might just like it.
Sure.
And Carlos, you got it? There we go.
Sorry, we got an ad coming up. It's gonna play.
Washington Journal continues.
Guys, so sorry about my internet.
Of policy concerning marijuana here on Washington Journal, and two guests joining us for that. Kevin Sabet of the Smart Approaches to Marijuana. He serves as president and CEO. He's also the author of Smokescreen: What the Marijuana Industry Doesn't Want You to Know. And Paul Armentano of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, known as NORML. He serves as their deputy director. But both of you gentlemen, thanks for giving us your time today.
Thank you.
And if we could start, both of you, about your organizations, the perspectives you bring when it comes to marijuana and legalization issues, and then how your organizations are funding. Mr. Sabet, if you wanted to go first.
Sure. Yeah. So SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana, was founded about a year or two after I left the Obama administration, where I served as senior policy advisor. I also served a bit in the Bush administration as well, because really this issue is nonpartisan, as am I. And we started SAM with former Congressman Patrick Kennedy, who had just left Congress, and David Frum, and also scientists and researchers from around the country, to really talk about marijuana in a way that was a sensible way, science-based, and really rejecting this false dichotomy between legalization or commercialization, which I'll talk about this morning, I think, a lot, on the one side, and criminalization on the other. I mean, Paul and I would agree that I don't think people should be criminalized or put in prison or arrested or given criminal records for low-level possession of marijuana, or even plant in your backyard, whatever. That is not what this is about. But the answer to that doesn't have to be full commercialization with promotion. So that's why we were founded, and we have a scientific advisory board of some of the top researchers around the country who are researching marijuana, and so we're a policy organization based on that.
Mr. Armentano.
Sure. NORML is a nonprofit advocacy organization that was founded many years ago to represent the rights and interests of responsible adult cannabis consumers. We don't represent the commercial industry. In fact, NORML was founded well before there even was such a thing as a commercial cannabis industry. We don't believe that cannabis is innocuous. We believe that cannabis ought to be regulated, and that any risks posed by the use of cannabis are best mitigated by a policy of legalization, regulation, and education. By contrast, we believe that the current policy of criminalization only exacerbates the potential risks associated with the use of cannabis.
So, Mr. Armentano, then pick up on there, because as you talk about from a user perspective, now we're at a point where the Drug Enforcement Agency is set to reclassify where cannabis falls on that. Could you talk a little bit about exactly what the classification does and how does it impact the user?
Sure, absolutely. This opinion by the DEA represents an about-face for an agency that historically has maintained a flat earth position when it comes to cannabis. Both symbolically and tangibly, it is significant to have the federal government, and these agencies in particular, HHS, FDA, DEA, for the first time publicly acknowledge what tens of millions of Americans have known for decades, and that is that cannabis possesses legitimate therapeutic efficacy, and that it doesn't belong categorized in the same schedule or the same class as drugs like heroin under the federal law.
And then Mr. Sabet, if you would then pick up on that, because in that classification it will move from 1 to 3. What does that exactly mean?
Yeah, well, it will move from 1 to 3 if it goes through. It has to go through a sort of formal period, and there will be probably legal challenges. So we're a little far from that. But the reality is, the reason it's Schedule 1 is because it has a high potential for abuse, which, marijuana is not your Woodstock weed. This isn't, 3% THC stuff we're talking. This can be up to 99% concentrates, the gummies, the sodas, the ice cream, the candy. all the kinds of things that put forward by this industry, which I'm glad that Paul is claiming, and I agree with him, and I believe him, is not representing. Unfortunately, it's not Paul that I have the issue with. The issue is that there's a multi-billion-dollar industry that is mimicking big tobacco, that is commercializing and promoting this all across the country, and they just want to make money. It's about profit. It's not about public health. And so what that would do is essentially give tax breaks to this industry. That's the main thing of Schedule 3. I think Paul and I, again, would agree on the facts here. It's not going to legalize marijuana. It's not going to go anywhere near legalizing marijuana. But what it will do is send the message that this is less harmful than we once thought, which is actually the opposite. I mean, it's funny to hear about flat Earth because scientists are in unison, in agreement with what we're saying, which is that it is much more harmful than we once thought because it's much stronger. It's genetically bred to be a very different drug. And so this is going to give them tax breaks. It's going to send the message that this is less harmful. And the reality is, and again, I actually would like Paul's opinion on this, frankly, to hear his perspective. We might agree on another thing, which is that this is really a political decision. This was a campaign promise that the president made when he was on the campaign trail, saying, we'll reclassify marijuana, and he didn't want to say, well, listen, because President Biden is against the legalization. Let's be clear. So this was sort of, I think, seen by the White House and the political establishment as a middle ground between not doing anything and legalizing marijuana. Let's reschedule it. We can kind of, have our cake and eat it too. Most people will sort of think that it's going to be legalized, but it's not. So that's good from a sort of young voter perspective. But then on the other hand, we're not actually legalizing it. And by the way, rescheduling will do nothing to get anybody out of jail in any state. By the way, no one's in prison or for low-level marijuana, but it won't even do anything to get rid of traffickers that are in prison. It won't do anything to get rid of expungement records, criminal records. It doesn't do anything with regards to criminal justice. So this idea that it's sort of, we've heard from the vice president, it's a social justice issue. Well, they're picking the wrong risk. Rescheduling it is really just going to be helping the industry. One thing I'll say is, again, this was a predetermined outcome. And I hate to say that. I worked for President Obama. And when I was working for President Obama, obviously, Vice President Biden was a key, player in the Office of National Drug Control Policy, where I serve. I have tremendous respect for the president, but the issue is, this was predetermined, and so they had to fit a square peg in a round hole, doing real intellectual gymnastics to basically get this into justify it scientifically on paper, defensible, which is I don't think it is defensible, but they do, that it should be Schedule 3. There were a lot of flaws in the so-called scientific analysis of this.
If you want to comment, viewers, on this reported reclassification and you support or oppose that move, if you support it, 202-748-8000. If you oppose it, 202-748-8001. Text us at 202-748-8003. Mr. Armentano, if you wanted to follow.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple points there that Kevin raised that I do agree with. And the main one is really emphasizing where this decision falls short. Kevin mentioned it's putting a square peg in a round hole. And with that, I tend to agree. This decision, of course, if it goes through, it really fails to rectify the divide that exists right now between federal marijuana policy and the cannabis legalization laws that currently exist in the majority of states in this country. Right now, most states regulate marijuana either as a medicine or for adult use, and they do so in a manner that's entirely inconsistent with the federal classification of cannabis as a Schedule I controlled substance. Unfortunately, if and when cannabis is moved to Schedule 3, that does nothing to address this conflict, because the very same state policies that are already in place now that are regulating cannabis that do not comply with marijuana Schedule I status will also be out of compliance with cannabis, a Schedule 3 substance. So I think that's going to create a lot more confusion than is necessary. Yeah. And I think what it's ultimately going to happen is regulators and eventually lawmakers, when the dust settles, are going to realize that they have not addressed the core problem. They haven't addressed the elephant in the room, and ultimately she's going to be punted back to Congress, and you're going to have the FDA and other agencies say, look, We need you as lawmakers to create a unique pathway for the regulation of cannabis so that these states can continue to engage in these activities and do so in a way that doesn't run afoul of federal law.
And Mr. Armentano, then what's the ideal pathway in your mind?
We already know. Look, this isn't rocket science. Almost a century ago, the federal government repealed alcohol prohibition. They got out of the marijuana enforcement business, thereby leaving the decision of how alcohol ought to be regulated largely up to the individual states. Some states continue to prohibit alcohol for many, many years after the federal government lifted the federal prohibition of alcohol. Some states moved to legalize and regulate alcohol right away. That's why today, in 2024, we have essentially a 50-state patchwork system when it comes to how alcohol is regulated. The way Connecticut regulates alcohol is very different than the way New York regulates alcohol, or California, or Texas, or Oklahoma. That's because alcohol is not in the Controlled Substances Act. Like tobacco, alcohol has been descheduled, thereby allowing state governments to decide largely what policies and regulations are best for their individual states, with some limited oversight by the federal government when it comes to things like interstate sales, marketing, advertising, tax collection, and those sort of issues.
And before
that's the answer, and that's what I wish that's really what I would result of this administrative petition had been, not a move to Schedule 3, but a move to take cannabis out of the CSA and treat it more like alcohol.
That's what I'm talking about.
Thank you. Yeah, as usual, Paul brings up a lot of very, very good points. We would have preferred to have descheduling entirely, but this is going to cause a lot of problems. I don't agree with Mr. Sabet on nearly 110% of what he says. But generally, this is a guy who brought a bag of cannabis gummies to an event, and he left the bag on the table when he walked away after his speech, and somebody grabbed it. But that's just his mindset. He, by the way, has a doctorate from University of Florida, even though he's not a doctor. I guess it was in psychology, but whatever. But it's not necessarily just a tax break for the cannabis industry. If anything, it's going to be a bigger boom for the pharmaceutical industry, who will be able to go ahead and produce more single molecule medicines, which can be sold by prescription in your local CVS. Something the cannabis industry will not be able to do. You see that as happening, David?
Yeah, potentially. Yeah. And that's why I don't think these things are mutually exclusive. I mean, I believe, there will be movement forward with big pharma, and I think there'll be obviously either continued movement with craft cannabis or state, sanctioned cannabis. But we'll see. The thing I think that's most interesting to me is everybody has their own opinion, and everybody's trying to scream louder than the next. I'm just holding on and waiting to see what happens. I don't think any of this really means anything until it happens, quite frankly. And there's still a long way to go for it to be even rescheduled. So it will happen when it happens, if it happens, and that's sort of my take on it. I'm waiting to see what will happen more than anything else.
I'll tell you this, David. People need organizations like Normal now more than ever. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen. They're going to go to Schedule 3, and it could go bad. It could go good. We just need organizations like Normal and guys like Gary Stein over there that, writes bills and, goes and lobbies legislators and stuff like that. Really now more than ever. And Gary, how can you support Normal?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, Carlos. By going to suncoastnormal.org, you can become a member of Suncoast Normal, the most politically active cannabis organization in the state of Florida. We are out there fighting with the incredibly uneducated legislators that do write all of our laws. And they are always waiting for our input. I know, because most bills are not written by them, they're written by the lobbyists who are shuffled it, who are basically doing it based on the amount of money that they give to the legislators. So we're out there trying to legislate, to educate, to legislate as we can possibly do, because we're not lobbyists per se. And we are going to try to steer things in the right direction. Now, if we don't get the adult use versus in regards to Amendment 3, we will still be fighting for reciprocity. We will still be fighting to make certain that you don't lose your job because you use cannabis medicinally. Make certain you don't lose your kid who use cannabis medicinally. Make certain you don't get kicked out of an institution or get taken off the transplant list because you use cannabis medicinally, and the host of other things that we've been fighting for, including home grow, which can be done legislatively if they have the willingness. And we need to change a lot of things in regards to cannabis in Tallahassee. I think for one thing, we need to wrest it away from the Department of Agriculture, who right now is going after the storefront owners for the products they sell, as opposed to the originators of those products, because they're worried about the efficacy and the safety of the products, which are not the venue of the storekeepers, but of where the product initiates from. But as long as they keep on going after the storefronts, we're going to have some real problems. We're going to have a lot of people who are going to lose their jobs.
But if you join Suncoast Normal, you don't just support the legalization of marijuana. What else do you get, Gary?
Yeah, you support the small businessman. You support all this legislation, and you can be a part of the change, which is so important. You get this great pin, you get a card, and you get when you happen to be in the vicinity of Ybor City at 1714 7th Street in Ybor City, you get a discount at Chillum CBD Emporium and Mushroom Emporium, where Carlos is sitting as we speak.
Now with a location in St. Petersburg, 1916 Central Ave.
Yes, 1716 Central Avenue, across the street from the Imaginary Museum, Imaginarium?
Imagine.
The Imagine Museum, which has a glass exhibit. Go figure for that kind of interesting bit of juxtaposition.
And also support us by following us on social media. We're at Suncoast Normal on all social media platforms. Go to our website for any information that you may be looking for. And of course, follow our podcasts. However you're looking at us, or you can follow us on SoundCloud, where I have the information here. SoundCloud, Spotify, Amazon Music, iTunes, Pandora, Facebook. You can also follow us on YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. And with that, Gary, you got anything else to say?
Well, first off, Dave, thank you so much for coming on again. You're like a frequent flyer now. You've actually been on 3 times, and we're great that we were able to wrest you away from Montel Williams to be able to come on the show and get a chance to talk to us about these important underlying topics that really control so much. And we're grateful to have you here. And I love your book. Even I learned something about it, which is great, which is the reason I read in the first place. But this is a fantastic book. Check out page 25. It's fantastic. It has my name on it.
I'd like to check that out, Gary, next time I see you.
Well, I'll bring you the book as soon as I get back on my feet. I had a bit of a slip and fall, and so I'm only on one leg for the time being.
How you feeling?
When that ends, I'll be right back in the shop and petting the dog.
How are you feeling? You feeling better?
Oh yes, absolutely. I made certain I did not use any opioids for the pain. That's Good. The way I am. And I'm going to continue along that path, not because it's an experiment, because it's a fact.
And I just personally want to apologize for this episode. Let me get that echo off. But man, everything that could go wrong has gone wrong during this episode. But we got content for you guys. It's out. It's done. This is a job well done.